Hello, fellow druids. It's been a bit. Been recording some Judgment. I kind of took a week off there. But we're going to try to get a little bit of content in here for War Machine and Hordes, and Circle, of course, hence the name of the show, Full Circle. I do just want to, if you are tuning into this and you're watching from a War Machine perspective and a Circle perspective, I do want to caveat, I posted this in a couple places, but I do want to caveat that I think between now and War Machine weekend, I'm going to be a little bit light on, at the very least, possibly in general on how much recording I'm doing, and certainly in specific on how much War Machine content I'm going to be putting out. Part of that is just that I'm sort of in this limbo area where we sort of have some idea of what is coming in the form of the CID, but there's a lot of question marks out there, and there's a lot of little nuance that could change. And frankly, like, it's just one of those things that until the rules get here, fully wrapping my brain around what my list, like what sort of list pairing I'm going to be looking at personally and things I'm going to be testing and so forth, is going to be a little bit hard to discern. A few of the models from the CID are still sort of in a sticky place, like the Well of Orboros and the Storm Raptor, for example, where they're like teeter-tottering on the, like, they have lists that they're going to go in, they're going to be amazing, or they're going to be harder to find places for. So, anyways, just some of those factors are why you've been seeing a little less Circle content from me. I'm going to need a little bit more time to wrap my head around it. We'll certainly do a video when the dynamic update drops, if it's not too close to War Machine weekend. If it is, it'll be after War Machine weekend. But and then as I'm starting to get some more solidified ideas, we will be looking at that. We might re-review some of the models and units and stuff, like I did after the Bones drops last year, and so forth. But for today, I did want to do some talk about some list ideas from the CID. I did this with Chromac 2, and I know that it was interesting for a few folks. And so I want to do something similar with the Blood Pack. So instead of looking at a caster, we're going to look at a unit. But you can certainly go into the CID and see where the Blood Pack ended up. But I wanted to talk about them because they're sort of one of the units that still feels like they're getting kind of the least scrutiny. A lot of the scrutiny is around Morvana 1, which we'll touch on in this episode. Anyways, you know, and Iona and Ravagers, which are all great. You know, Wolf Riders in there, the Wolf Riders solo, Bridge and Call. Like, a lot of these got a lot of scrutiny. Lord of the Feast and our Living Beasts, of course, received actually a lot of scrutiny. And I feel like the Blood Pack did get tested. There were definitely games testing it. But in the Circle community in general, it's just sort of like, yeah, Blood Pack are great. We think now, maybe. But nobody's really talking about building lists with them. It sort of feels like yeah, they're playable now, but all the competitive focus is kind of over here on other stuff. And I think they might be one of the, they might end up being one of the best changes out of this list, or this update. And just to touch on why that is, first of all, they've been brought up to parity with defensive stats, with Ravagers. They are now very much focused on their ranged attacks. They have reposition 3, that's huge. They have a 12-inch bow, that's huge. They're POW 14, which is pretty much the top that you're going to get out of range damage. Sorry, range damage from a unit. That is, they have Tree Walker, which lets them draw line of sight through forest, which is absolutely unique in the game. They have Hunter, which is also helping them ignore some pretty considerable buffs that are out there. Concealment cover are huge. Last they had Arcing Fire. I'm kind of not sure that I'm convinced they're going to keep Hunter and Arcing Fire, but that also means now they're ignoring models. So, and they still have Heart Eater and POW 11 melee weapons, so it's not like they're slouches in melee. They still have Tough, they still have Rapid Healing. And they're pretty reasonable point costs at 15 points for 6 models. So they're in a really good place. And so then you're like, well, where do I want to put them? And I'm sort of, there's a few different places. I think you either want to have them in lists where they're going to be able to, sometimes they are going to be a little bit more of the focus of the list, and sometimes the list is going to need them for focus, right? So they are definitively the ranged unit for this theme, right? Before there was kind of no definitive ranged unit in my opinion. You had the blood trackers who maxed out at 14. You had the old blood pack, but they were just at the points they were at and what they did just were not the right fit really at all for what was going on. And Wolf Riders didn't really occupy that. They're sort of designed more to skirmish and things and be a melee. But now Speed 6, Repo 3, the extra rules, like they're dedicated at range. They have rules that are for the range, they benefit the range, they're a good range unit. And POW 14, like I said, is kind of the top that you're going to get to with infantry units ranged attack, right? Like I think the only thing better than that would be like the range 12 POW 12 Starfall archers that have brutal damage as a shot type. They're going to outdamage by a little bit. And obviously Circle doesn't have the, Ossians or Nemos or Canes or things like that that are going to support the range damage the same way a more range-centric faction will. But we do have some ways to support it. So what are some places where you would put Blood Pack where they might be featured prominently? And there's a few places. The first couple are focused on getting more damage out of them. So I would say in those places you've got Morvana 1. You have Wormwood, really in specific those two, right? So you have Curse of Shadows on Wormwood, and you have Mortality, assuming that sticks on Morvana 1. Now, Mortality is great because now they go up to Rat 8 effective against their target, and POW 16, which is a pretty reasonable amount of damage for a ranged attack, especially when you get 6 or 12 of them. From there, you can also increase their accuracy in a few other ways. You can bring in Argus Moonhound, who has marked the target, so now you can bring them up to Rat 8 in any list. You also can bring a white mane along for the veteran leader and bring them up another +1, which is certainly considerable. It also puts them in that situation where if you're starting to go into things like Angelii in Legion or other Circle heavies, like other Circle Warp Wolves, really anything that is at any point where the model starts trading out defense for armor, these guys are going to love it because they're only going to get so much damage, but they can definitely get more accurate, right? Theoretically, we could bring Hutchuck. I have not tested that, but another swing into Jacks means you might be able to drop a Jack by using Hutchuck selectively. And just in general, you can, if you put a number of POW 16 bow shots into something, you can then pretty easily use something like your Warpwolf Stalker to get in there, kill it, and sprint out. Or maybe, control it in other ways, or if you have some sort of Grievous Wounds attack, like the Blood Weavers have, things like that, you're going to be looking a little better than you might think. Into any sort of lighter targets or infantry, you're able to, shoot from a long ways away, drop them. I would say most light Warjacks and Warbeasts are not going to want to be on the other side of this. And then, like I said, Curse of Shadows and Mortality are definitely good buffs. In particular, Wormwood is great because you also have the Forest Feet. They literally don't care about whatsoever. They can just shoot. He can feed at any time, and they can shoot through it. Which is important because a lot of times if I've played Wormwood at least, is the situation where you want to feat, but you also want to get Curse of Shadows out. But if you feat, the models that need the Curse of Shadows aren't going to be able to take advantage of it because they're also having their line of sight blocked. Well, Blood Pack don't care. They just do not care. So, and the White Manes don't care either, which is really helpful for the countercharge and things like that. So, yeah. So, anyways, Wormwood's a really good place, in my opinion, to look for them. Morvana's going to be able to recur them. And then there's some other interesting places as well, right? Morvana 2 is potentially interesting. She's got the rerolls for them. She has the ability to bring them back with her feet. Fog of War functions in a similar fashion where it gives them some defensive bonus. She's able to play some of the same game, softening them up and whatnot. She's not going to get the pure damage numbers, but she is going to play kind of a longer, more grindy game potentially. Mosar is actually interesting. He also has Curse of Shadows. they might be one of the strongest ways to enable him to do the telebaric assassination, which is, if you're not familiar, running a model near their near enough to their caster, to within 2 inches of their caster. Most are used as Sands of Fate, to replace that model, and then casts Doppler Bark, making them defense 5. He potentially throws Curse of Shadows on them, or hits them, or whatever the situation requires, and then you go ahead and unload all of your ranged attacks into their caster, and then they're dead. Which is pretty threatening with these guys, where you can drop 12 POW 16 attacks on a caster. Most of them die. At defense 5, like, most of them die. So it's only some of the convergence casters that get around that, and it threatens a long ways, which means their caster's probably having to play out of the game, which means then what you're using Mosar for is to rough up their infantry. You're casting, you've got Sunhammer out there to start chipping damage away at their jacks. You've got these guys chipping damage away at their jacks. They've got pillars in the way. They've got his feet to be annoying. They've got a few other things, and you can kind of slowly do this thing where you're sandpapering away at their army, and if their caster does ever step out of line, you just end the game. It's also nice, a list like that is kind of nice in a bigger tournament potentially, where you want a couple games maybe early on, where if you can catch somebody off guard with how that works, then honestly most people at a tournament have probably not seen it if it's not one of your local events and you've been playing it. And if that's the case, you're going to be at an advantage in some of your early rounds. So that's something to consider. There's a few other places I might consider them. Kruger 2 is really interesting. He can obviously keep them safe throughout much of the game. And with his feet, you're sort of going to get that like extra turn of shooting every game. And you can combine it with some of the other Tharn synergies. Pardon me. He's a good place for like a Stalker, who again, you can soften up a target. Get the Stalker in there to finish it off, sprints away. Hopefully doesn't have to spend a lot of fury to do so. You're in a good place. I think Chromac 1 is a really interesting place for them. And here it's less, I sort of alluded to this, but it's less about what they do for Chromac, or sorry, what Chromac does for them, which is very little. He mostly just has Beast Shield to keep them from having spells cast at them. Which is not inconsiderable. There's games that's going to be a big deal. But he has an arm buff, but you're probably putting it on something else. But what they do for him is provide him with probably what is now the most reliable Warpath triggers that we have. Again, at range 12, they ignore a lot of bonuses. You can possibly get them up to Rat 7 just with Whitemane. If they aim, they can go to 9, if that's the route you go. And you can use, 2 mins, 2 maxes, 1 max, whatever. But the thing is, at 12-inch range and Repo 3, they're going to be able to stay back out of the way, so that sort of Chromac's central force, if you will, of Warpwolves is going to be able to do its work in the middle, keeping things like the lanes clear. Sorry, not keeping the lanes clear, but sending in your Stalker, doing your work, getting your sprints back out, or sideways or whatever. Getteric's same thing, and your Feral or your Loki or whatever it is, you're able to fit into the list. And then, of course, you get the Blood Shaman, which helps out Chromac as well, which is why I started thinking about this. But I do think Ravagers in that scenario are actually particularly good, just because of being able to do that for Chromac. Like, one of the reasons you have not seen Chromac 1 played a lot is because in Call of the Wild, which is where you kind of want him, that he doesn't really have any reliable Warpath triggers at range, and if you don't have that, you're kind of in trouble a lot of times. And then further, at POW 14, they're also putting those damage numbers onto those harder targets, so that when you send in your Stalker, you can make sure that you're actually going to kill that model. Because if you... A lot of times, especially with no damage buff in Chromac 1, if you're sending in a Stalker, even with its enhanced stats, you're going to want to make sure that the model is going to die, and to do that, you probably are going to want, like, to get that insurance, putting a couple extra, it may only be 2, 3, 4 damage, but that's going to change your math on success likelihood quite a bit. So that's another place for them. Boulder 1, I mean, he has feet and stuff. I don't think he's the greatest, just because you're not amplifying really any part of them, and they're not doing anything in particular for him. Tanith is interesting, but probably interesting with other Tharn for other reasons. Una 2 actually is one that I've not given a ton of thought to until just this moment, but for this unit. But two units of Blood Pack where you can cycle Mirage and Hand of Fate between them, sort of like I did with the Wolf Riders. But instead of them going in, now you have this situation where while your Griffins do threaten a long ways, now I have this like ranged threat where if you don't want to come into my threat ranges, I will be happy to just shoot you with Hand of Fated POW 14s the whole game. And then once you do come in, I can soften you up. I send in the birds. I kill everything you love, and we go on about our day. So obviously, Hand of Fate is great on literally everything. So some of this is of no real surprise, but just because of their like ability to step up and step back 3, you're going to be able to get a lot of damage out there without a lot of reprisal into these guys, and that's what's really key about them. So. Una doesn't really have any ways to keep them safe, which is one of the only downsides, of course. But and there's a few other places they would be interesting. Like I said, Kruger 1 could be interesting. He can keep them pretty safe. I feel like I'm missing somebody. Talked about Wormwood, talked about Kruger 2. I don't really see them with like Iona though, so that's part of the reason they probably haven't had a lot of focus, is because because of her feat being such an integral part of her list. I don't think like that's a place where Wolf Riders would be better, and Ravagers, and really literally every other unit of Tharn. So, anyways, we're gonna wrap it up here. That was a pretty good little chat about the Blood Pack. Like I said, if you have more ideas or thoughts, feel free to post on any of the usual places that I mentioned in the Discord, Facebook, Twitter, etc., or in the video. I'd love to hear if you have any thoughts as well, or if you get a chance to try a list like that. I'd like to hear how it's doing. And as I mentioned, we'll be a little bit lighter on the content probably between now and a little bit after War Machine Weekend, but that's okay. And then, as always, thanks for tuning in, and we will catch you next time.